Friends, I welcome you all who are present in the Gandhi Peace Foundation Auditorium, New Delhi, Mahabodhi Society Hall, Kolkata, and Mahaposhi Aurangam Hall, Chennai, and those who have tuned themselves to the AIACC YouTube channel and Facebook page throughout the country. Today is the first day of the two-day conference against the disastrous National Education Policy 2020 of the BJP-led central government. It is being organized by the All India Safe Education Committee. Today is the academic session of the conference. You know that we have with us the front-ranking educationists, historians, intellectuals of the country who have taken all strains to join with us to deliver their speeches in order to give exposure to different aspects of the NEP 2020. The speakers are Professor Irfan Habib, eminent historian, Aligarh Muslim University; Professor Sukhdev Thorat, former chairman, University Grants Commission; Professor Romila Thapar, eminent historian, Jawaharlal Nehru University; Professor A. Karunananthan, retired professor and head of the Department of History, Vivekananda Arts and Science College, Chennai; Professor Sachidanand Sinha, Professor, Center for the Study of Regional Development, School of Social Sciences, JNU; Professor Chandrasekhar Chakraborty, President, All Bengal Safe Education Committee and former Vice Chancellor of West Bengal University of Animal and Fisheries Sciences; Professor Tapadhir Bhattacharjee, former Vice Chancellor, Assam University, Silchar; Professor L. Jawahar Nishan, former Vice Chancellor, JSS University, Mysore. The session will be inaugurated by Prakash N. Shah, President, AIACC, editor, Nirikshak, and leading social activist. The introductory speech will be delivered by Professor Anish Rai, General Secretary, AIACC. Since the conference is being held in online-offline combined mode, we have to close the session within a stipulated time considering data needed for listening online. I am therefore very apologetic to request you, the honorable speakers, to conclude your speeches within the time we discussed with you earlier. With these few words, let me start the academic session of the two-day conference. I now request Professor Prakash Prakash N. Shah, the President of AIACC. He is also the editor of Nirikshak and a leading social activist. I request him to inaugurate this conference.
फ्रेंड्स, कॉन्फ्रेंस का होना और कोरोना के बाद और बीच में होना अपने में एक बड़ी बात है। उससे भी अगर आगे देखें तो जिस प्रकार से तथाकथित एजुकेशन पॉलिसी को लाया जा रहा है, उसके कॉन्टेक्स्ट में सारे देश में काफी बहस चलनी चाहिए और अपनी आवाज उठानी चाहिए। इस दृष्टि से एक कॉन्फ्रेंस का आरंभ करते हुए मुझे अपने एक कर्तव्य बोध का ख्याल आता है और प्रसन्नता भी मैं महसूस करता हूँ। प्रसन्नता मैंने कहा, बट मोर देन दैट देयर इज अ सेंस ऑफ कंसर्न। एक प्रकार से निस्बत का ख्याल है, केवल प्रसन्नता नहीं, लेकिन क्योंकि निस्बत है, निस्बत के साथ जुड़ी एक प्रसन्नता भी है। आज देश में हम शिक्षा नीति की बात करें तो मेरे हिसाब से सबसे बड़ा मुद्दा जो बनता है, अहम मुद्दा बनता है, वो ये है कि देश ने इतने सारे कमीशन देखे स्वराज के बाद, राधाकृष्णन कमीशन, कोठारी कमीशन, वीपी सिंह के जमाना में आचार्य राममूर्ति ने विशेष अभ्यास किया, ये सब, और एक मायने में राजीव गांधी के समय में भी कुछ बात चली। एज अगेंस्ट ऑल दिस बैकग्राउंड, एज अगेंस्ट ऑल दिस बैकग्राउंड, अभी जो हो रहा है वो अलग बात हो रही है। एक कोशिश है, इट्स अ प्रोसेस फॉर चेंजिंग डिस्कोर्स। मैं चेंजिंग डिस्कोर्स तो बड़ी वो पार्लियामेंट्री विनम्रता से कहता हूं। हमारा जो सारा विमर्श स्वराज के आंदोलन में और संविधान के निर्माण में जो डेवलप हुआ, उस सारे विमर्श को तहस नहस करने की बात इसमें है। अ पिक्युलर ब्रांड ऑफ नेशनलिज्म, ये इस डिस्कोर्स को बदलने की बात है। सर, वी हैव हैड अ ग्रेट ट्रेडिशन and we are proud of it. In present times, beginning with Raja Ram Mohan Rai and Vidyasagar and others, led by Tagore and Gandhi from their respective ends, the great Maharashtra tradition of Prabodhana, beginning from Phule and culminating in a way into Ambedkar, the revolutionary tradition and thinking of Bhagat Singh that emerges through his notebooks, ये सब में there were of course shades of differences, but all said and done, they thought of a just India. All said and done, they thought of India with all its diversities. All said and done, they had a sort of plural approach. All said and done, all their discussion was ultimately culminating towards equality, freedom, and liberty. This is the tradition of India that emerged through the Renaissance led by Ram Mohan Rai and the freedom struggle led by our leaders. All this thinking went in the making of our constitution also. तो आज जो नई बात चली है वो एक खास प्रकार के नेशनलिज्म को एडवोकेट करने की चली है। द नेशनलिज्म एज इमर्ज इन इंडिया, उसमें आप शेड्स देखेंगे, नुआंसेस देखेंगे, बट इट वाज बेसिकली टिल्टिंग टुवर्ड्स सेक्युलरिज्म और सर्वधर्म समभाव, and of course it was on a non-communal basis that it emerged. That has been the gift that we are given by our freedom struggle. अब आज जो हो रहा है वो यानी we are aware. आप देखिए, I mentioned Gandhi and Tagore in the same breath. अब देखिए, they had their own different emphasis, great men in their own right. Uh, Tagore criticized Gandhi, and Gandhi issued a rejoinder. But while issuing rejoinder, he appreciated and saluted Gandhi, Tagore. Gandhi appreciated and saluted Tagore as a great sentinel. I am using the words Gandhi used, a great sentinel. So, I'm many a times I'm reminded of a rather, rather revealing fact. Roma Rolla, who wrote Gandhi's biography, earlier he had written about Lenin and of course Vivekanand. Same Roma Rolla advised Gandhians कि भाई आप ये टैगोर के नेशनलिज्म की बात को जरा समझो. टैगोर ने नेशनलिज्म को जिस पर्सपेक्टिव रखा है अब जरा समझो. काका कालेलकर, a freedom fighter in his own right and a great literary figure, an Acharya of Gujarat. Kalelkar wrote back to Roma Rolla कि sir, Tagore's lectures on nationalism, we have made it a textbook in Gujarat Vidyapit, Gandhi's Vidyapit. Tagore criticizing Gandhi and Gandhi's Vidyapit prescribing Tagore. आजकल तो कोई प्रिस्क्राइब करना क्या क्या सब प्रोस्क्राइब करना का सोचते हैं. तो ये हमारी ट्रेडिशन है और आज इस सारे विमर्श को तहस नहस करने की एक मुहिम, साजिश तो क्या कहेंगे, जो सो ओपन नाउ तो मुहिम ही कहेंगे, साजिश तो क्या कहेंगे, बट ये चल रहा है. तो इस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में आज इरफान हबीब साहब, रोमिला जी, सुखदेव थोराट, अपने सच्चिदानंद सिन्हा जी, अपने वेस्ट बंगाल चैप्टर के अध्यक्ष महोदय और सब विद्वानों का हमारे बीच होना, ये एक सौभाग्य की बात है. और इसके लिए मैं तहे दिल से मेरा आनंद और मेरी प्रसन्नता प्रकट करते हुए इस कॉन्फ्रेंस का, उसके ऑन द ईव ऑफ दैट कॉन्फ्रेंस, ये अपने एकेडमिक सेशन का आरंभ करते हुए एक आनंद महसूस करता हूं. धन्यवाद.
Good morning. Namaste. On behalf of the All India Save Education Committee, I heartily welcome the distinguished speakers, guests, and all attendees to this All India Save Education Conference against the disastrous National Education Policy 2020. Today, the academic session, as our President said, and Professor Nashkar also indicated, will be addressed by eminent historians, educationists, and other professionals of the country. Before we have the privilege to listen to them, I would like to add a few introductory words on why we are holding this conference. We have to understand the full severity of the attacks on education, a soft target to produce a docile, pliant population for the rulers to play upon. Attacks had been mounting since independence and took a significant turn towards worse with the NP 86. But presently they have reached the severest forms with the rulers desperate to drive the last nail to the coffin. Forget about the man making, character building role of the education. Even the minimum vestiges of scientific, secular, democratic, and universal education, as conceived and to some extent attained during the nation building freedom struggle of our country, is being wiped out. Instead, in the name of so called Indian knowledge system, avowedly to bring back the ancient glory of India, the textbooks and curricula are being rewritten in a made to fit, distorted way. Particular attack has been on the history. Further, amalgamating this hype on IKS with the amalgamating with this hype on IKS, the high-tech modern skill development is meant to create bigots bereft of rationality, bereft of a unquestioning mind, with an unquestioning mind bereft of any scientific bent, any ability to face the world rationally with courage and confidence. In the human history, such mindset is found only under fascistic regimes. Bidding goodbye to the dream of the government taking up the responsibility of educating every person of the country free of cost, the NP 86 ushered in privatization, commercialization. The NEP 2020 puts public and private investments at par, advocates technology based, corporate owned, app dependent online education as the new normal, gadget run education of ECCE for the even at the earliest formative stage of children, thereupon tending to total corporatization of education, with the government washing its hands off. Rather, the government obediently follows the diktats of the fora like World Bank, WTO, GATS, or making education a global commodity. Surely these things will make decent education recede farther and farther from common students. On the other hand, writing off the cherished concept of freedom first, freedom always, with a view to keeping the rising resentment in reign and centralizing administrative powers, academic administrative autonomy of educational institutions are being carved, democratic rights of stakeholders are being snatched away from behind the cover of the slogan light but tight regulation. Strikingly, in contrast with the IKS, the NEP 2020 promotes several measures and methods like CBCS, ABC scheme, 4-year undergraduate course, vocationalization in mainstream education, multidisciplinary approach, even at school levels. Many of these, if not all, are nothing but a copy paste exercise of even failed system from countries like particularly USA. The entire system is designed for rearing a minuscule minority to obtain and make use of advanced high-tech education at high cost. Particularly shocking is the Indian brand of ECCE under the World Bank sponsored STARS project, in which Anganwadi workers, already utterly deprived, are being given the charge of this highly technical system, specialized system in government schools, thereby ruining the very foundation of school education there. Economic disparity in the society is thus being introduced into the field of education by producing marked discrimination between privileged few and the hapless majority. To counter these attacks, this All India Safe Education Committee conference is a step towards organizing people to develop powerful instruments of struggle for a sustainment to thwart implementation of the heinous and ominous NEP 2020. We hope the deliberations from distinguished speakers will illumine the course for us to follow. The AICC pledges to hold high the banner of genuine scientific, secular, democratic, and universal education, a mission it took up in 1989 and is consistently following all these years. With these words, I end my speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rai. By your illuminating speech, you have set the path of the conference. Now, the turn of the eminent invited speakers. First, I request Professor Irfan Habib, eminent historian of Aligarh, and he belonged to Aligarh Muslim University. Again, I am very apologetic to say that due to constraint of time, I request Professor Habib to conclude his speech within 12 to 15 minutes. Professor Habib.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary of the Safe Education Conference or India Safe Education Conference, I should first like to thank you for giving me this opportunity to address the conference, which I think is a very important step in opposing the so-called national education policy, which was published last year and is now in the course of implementation. It does happen that history is one of the subjects towards which nationalists and fascists, I use the word nationalists in the sense of those who exalt one's own country beyond all measure. Yeah. They usually appeal to particular versions of history which they profess, according to which the country concerned is placed in the highest position, and within this country, particular sections are marked out for disparagement and suppression. Nazi Germany was its classic example. Now, it does happen that the present regime is going forward with a version of history, a version of Indian history, which will support its very narrow and sectarian and semi-fascist position. Already in the national education policy documents, reference is made to Indian knowledge system as if the knowledge in India, as developed in India, was different from knowledge elsewhere. And then, of course, the so-called emphasis on so-called patriotism to education. Now, what it means in detail has already been set out by the University Grants Commission in its syllabus for history for the BA courses. My own remarks will be based on this statement from the University Grants Commission, which actually elaborates the kind of patriotism that the National Education Policy 2020 brings to impose, one wishes to impose on India. The very first fact is the very narrow view of history that this syllabus has. History has developed far from merely a history of national deeds and political deeds and religious events. It embraces archaeology, epigraphy, genetics, and so on, methods which were not used by historians over 100 years ago or 200 years ago. And at the same time, the scope of history has expanded from the kind of history that you find in Rajatarangini or Harshacharita or medieval historians. From rulers and religious figures, now we want to know how ordinary people lived, what troubled them, what thoughts they had. We want to have details of economic history, of development of ideas and technology, and notably now women's history. All this development in historiography, in the world as well as in India, is set on one side by the UGC syllabus. We don't have any concern, much concern for the common people. The UGC syllabus is manifestly racial because it begins with a concern to prove that Indians were the original Aryans. How does it matter? They are at the same time bringing this racial issue into India by their manifestly anti-Dravidian position in claiming the Indus civilization for the Aryans. And that claim is put forward by a simple change of nomenclature. Instead of Indus or Harappan civilization, you call it Saraswati Sindhu civilization. And Saraswati being a sacred river, of course, river goddess in the Rig Veda, is imposed on the Indus civilization. And therefore, any Dravidian connection, which two of the Dravidian characters, Indus characters, suggest, is pushed on one side. And of course, there is chronology is also dispensed with because obviously Rig Veda is later in time than the Indus civilization. Similarly, there is now confusion between myth and history. The Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the Puranas are to be the main sources of our early history. So, Indian history is to be a part of mythology, ancient mythology. Other interesting things are also notable in this syllabus. The caste system is not at all discussed in ancient India. Of course, the time is past when the caste system could be celebrated. as an important social institution. Now it is to be totally ignored in ancient India and only brought into picture in this syllabus in its period, what it calls Muslim rule. So that supposedly the caste system, one would infer from it, was brought by the Muslims or under the pressure by Muslims on Indian society. Whatever be the motive, an ancient student doing ancient Indian course would hardly study the caste system under this syllabus. On the other hand, while Shudras and Chandalas and others are just pushed under the carpet, Rajputs become important, that the syllabus would study the origin of the Rajputs, as if this is a very important matter to be considered in early medieval India. Now, as far as the presence of Muslims is concerned, anyone reading the syllabus will consider that this was a disaster. Most interestingly, Akbar is ruled out of the syllabus. Only his opponents, particularly Rana Pratap and Queen Durgavati and so on, are to be studied. There's particular attention to the slogan of Hindu Padshah, which even the Marathas never took seriously, and that belonged to the time of Muhammad Shah, which is now pushed back and put in the time of Aurangzeb, totally unhistorically in the syllabus. Cultural history is practically out. With almost a person studying medieval India would not study anything about Mughal painting or Mughal architecture or know even about any of the Taj Mahal. This kind of history, which is actually mythology or created history, is going to be presented to the young Indian generation in the new BA course, which is to be set forth to be established under the national education policy. I would end by saying that this is not history, but bad mythology, and totally opposed to the scientific spirit which must motivate all knowledge. I welcome, therefore, this step by this conference to stoutly oppose the national education policy and all the measures by which it is going to be implemented, one of which, quite notably, is its total misinterpretation of Indian history in the ways I have briefly set forth. Thank you very much for giving me time to address this conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Habib. He has dwelt on Indian knowledge system and also the design of synchronization of history by UGC by through declaring its new history syllabus for BA course. Now I request Professor Sukhdev Thorat. He is former chairman of University Grants Commission. I request Professor Thorat to conclude your speech within 12 to 15 minutes. Due to constraint of time, I am also very apologetic to you to conclude your speech within that very short time. Professor Shukdev Thorat.
Good morning to all of you. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this discussion on uh, safety education, particularly in the context of new education policy. Given the time constraint, I will come to the point of where I want to share my view about some aspect of the new education policy. The one of uh, the central goal of this new education policy seems to me is to improve the quality of education, and in the process, of course, the policy also mention about equity and inclusiveness in higher education. However, my reading of the report gives me is clear evidence that while the access to quality education is being suggested, uh, the access to quality education, in my view, will happen at the cost of a denial of access to large majority of the poor and deprived sections. So equity and exclusion is going to be one of the victims. The higher education, whichever quality it carries, uh, will remain confined to a relatively economically better off section, and the massification of higher education that we began in early 50s will get hampered. It is already being hampered as such. Now, there are elements in the education policy which talks about several measures to improve the quality, but at the same time, this measure will affect the access of the poor to the higher education. At the moment, our enrollment ratio in higher education is close to one third, way behind many of the developing countries, including China and other. And at this stage, to introduce the measure which will reduce the access to higher education, in my view, is not correct. Uh, there are limitation of this report. I am not going to say anything about that. I have already mentioned in my earlier lecture. But the way it will affect the equity and inclusiveness is a matter of concern. We have developed a policy since the early 50s, and in new in the education policy of 1986 and program of higher education in 1992, we have emphasis on the public education system. We set up colleges in government. We also introduced private colleges, but private aided colleges, where uh, the the fee and other structure is similar to that of government. And we have public state universities. So public state university, the government colleges, public colleges, what we called, and the private aided colleges, has been our instrument of providing access to the uh, to all, but particularly to the poor. Now, there are developments since last 20, 25 year, 30 year, which have reversed this process, which are in the process of reversing uh, the policy of equal access to all. One of the important reason is, of course, is the privatization of higher education, which we have never thought that it will take such a high magnitude. As of today, if you take 2017-18, close to half of the universities in the country are in private sector, self-financing university, self-financing deemed universities, state private universities, and other private universities. Half of it. We will never we never imagine that it will go to that extent. Most of our 90% of our colleges are private colleges. As a result, if you look at the access to the higher education, it has been quite low to the poor and to the marginalized section. If you take the enrollment ratio by income group, that is monthly per capita consumption expenditure, by taking national sample survey, you find that the enrollment rate of the poor is very low. It's about 11 to 12%, and it increases as we go into the uh, higher income bracket. So disparities are primarily because of the income, uh, and the public education system provides some opportunity to them. Similarly, we have disparities in the access to higher education by social group. The enrollment of scheduled caste is much lower, followed by scheduled tribe. The enrollment of Muslim is much lower compared to the higher caste. So the inter-caste, inter-religious, and inter-income group disparities are very, very clear at the moment. And one of the major reason is, of course, the privatization of higher education. If you take the total student by their income, by their caste, and look at their share in the self-financing colleges, which are private colleges where the fee is very high, or you take the state private university and central deemed private university, the share of the poor in this is low. So I think certainly the access to higher education and quality education, professional education, is the victim of the privatization of the higher education. Now, in the new education policy, although it shows there is a separate para on equity and inclusive education, it proposed the state government and the education institution to take step. But I think all the several measures that have been suggested are counterproductive to this suggestion. Let me take one by one very quickly because we don't have time. I will only list them, and then some of you can then go into greater detail and examine. I think the policy suggestion for quality improvement, which are going to affect the access to the higher education to the poor, include the following. First thing is that the duration of the bachelor degree has been now retained 3 years, but also increased to 4 years. So the educational cost uh, will increase, and it will affect the access of the poorer section to higher education. They will prefer the 3-year degree than the 4-year degree. And you are also creating sort of an hierarchy within the degree. Some will be bachelor with 3 years, some will be bachelor with 4 years. This is not the way. The Kothari Commission brought an uniformity in terms of 3 plus 2 plus duration of the degrees. So the duration will affect the access. Then there is a recommendation of unitary university as against the affiliating university. Concept of unitary university is American concept wherein all undergraduate, postgraduate, PhDs are under one shade. It has been successful there. It's a good idea. That's not the point. But we have begun with the affiliating system, where we have a university and there are hundreds of several colleges which are affiliated. Now, the advantage of affiliating system is that the colleges are spread into large villages, small town, medium town, and large cities also. Now, since the location of the colleges is into small town, larger villages, it provides a very easy access to the poorer section. The new education policy propose the larger university in the district places. In fact, it has proposed 360 bigger universities to be set up in districts, and the putting of colleges into cluster university at medium town. Now, obviously, this will affect the access. At the moment, the student goes to a nearby college, go and take a admission. This is the another aspect which you will have to deal with and examine in greater detail. And in addition to that, the new education policy proposed national test for admission. They have already announced for the central university. And I am not surprised that it will also be there for some of the professional colleges and the state universities. Now, national test, why do we need a national test? You have for medical engineering, but for the liberal education, um, the student normally enter into the college and university see their percentage. If they have a seat, they give you admission. It's a lot more liberal policy. Introducing a national test will affect the access of the relatively poor section. I think Tamil Nadu report has brought out this aspect. Then the not only privatization, but we are allowing the 100 foreign university in the country. And you know that the fee structure will be such that there will be much less access to the poor. There are other ways of foreign collaboration. You can have inter-university collaboration, um, and you can have a joint degree. You can have exchange of teacher and the curriculum. This is also one way of benefiting from the foreign university. But to setting up 100 university is literally not only bringing competition with our domestic universities, but also affecting the access to a greater extent. Online education, the UGC's directive that the online offline will be in the ratio of 60 to 40%, 40% online education. If you look at the national sample survey data on the availability of the internet facility and computer and telephone in the rural area and among the poor, a very small proportion of them in rural area have computers and the internet facility. Irregularity of electricity supply is one of the reasons. But you cannot, the poor cannot, each of the student cannot have a smartphone. The smartphone is not the way whereby you teach the student. So this 40% online education will certainly affect the access to higher education to the student. Poor stay in a small room, 2 rooms. There is hardly any isolated place where you can listen to the lectures. There are other ways. There is a distance mode education. The student can go to the colleges, and there a teacher from different university or good teacher can teach, and in the college you can listen to a lecture on the through the distance mode. Why do you need this online education without having any necessary infrastructure facility? Friend, these are some of the element uh, in the new education policy which will affect the access to higher education. On privatization, the new education policy says that it will continue with the policy of non-profit universities, non-profit institution. What is the non-profit meaning of the non-profit institution? That these institutions are allowed not allowed to have profit, but they are allowed to have surplus, which is to be invested in the university itself. And we know what is surplus. Surplus is indirectly a profit. So, on privatization of higher education, also there is not much change, and privatization move is in a way encouraged. But there are several steps that I have pointed out to you. That is increasing the duration of the bachelor degree from 3 to 4 years. Then the switching over to the unitary system, everything 50 affect the access to the poor. And therefore I said that the a more emphasis is quality, but access into account. The reason, I tell you why, and I'll end with that. The reason is that this committee is not based on the study of the system. The way Kothari Commission or Radhakrishna Commission worked for 2 years, studied all the colleges, university, collected the data. If you look at the writing of the report of Kothari Commission or Radhakrishna Commission report, each chapter has a data of the university, and then they draw the conclusion, make recommendation. This committee never studied the entire education system, and therefore there is a feeling of scare that when you implement this without understanding the system, we do not know what will happen, how will it will distort the higher education system. Well, these are some of the thoughts that I wanted to share you. Thank you very much for inviting me here.
Different aspects and many aspects like disparities in access in higher education, self-financing system, privatization of education, the victim of privatization of education, introduction of 4-year bachelor degrees, all these things, and also against the entry of 100 foreign universities, 40% online education, the bad effects of these we have discussed. Thank you very much, Professor Thorat. Professor Thorat spoke from Pune, and earlier Professor Habib spoke from Aligarh. Now I request another very eminent historian, Professor Romila Thapar of Jawaharlal Nehru University. I request Professor Romila Thapar.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for the invitation to address this conference. Extremely important, because education, in a sense, is the lifeblood of the future. And we have to be very careful and very particular about the kind of education that we give to the generations to come. Education is a vast subject, so I would like to focus on just one aspect that has been generally neglected by most educationists, namely the role of textbooks in education. When I say that it's been neglected, let me explain that what I mean is that the true purpose of a textbook is often set aside. I would like to begin with the primary question: what is the function of a textbook in education? A textbook, according to me, has two main functions. One is to provide the basic information on the subject, and the second, which is equally important, if not more important, is to teach students not only to ask questions about the subject, but to ask relevant questions from what they are studying. The students must understand why they are studying what they are studying. Let me apply this to the subject that I have specialized in, the study of early Indian history, often called ancient Indian history, and on which I happen to write 2 textbooks for middle schools for class 6 and class 7. A textbook in history should begin with the question of why we study the past. There can be many reasons. There is a curiosity about the past. We may want to know about our origins and what happened to us in earlier times. We like to know from whom we are descended. And this information can fulfill our curiosity. However, it has to be treated very carefully because it can often be used to separate groups of people and give a higher status to some and a low status to others. This attribution of status has to be questioned. This was one of the ways in which caste came into being. And it does go back to ancient times, to the ancient period. It was decided that some people, such as those concerned with rituals or those claiming to have supernatural powers, and being more highly educated than others, were to be treated as superior. For example, the Brahmins were differentiated for these reasons and given high status. Others labored in various different ways, and their status was adjusted to their work. Then another set of questions began to be asked. For instance, what were the major changes in society from earlier times to later times? Why do some customs continue and some fade out? So historians began studying cultures, extremely important. That is the pattern of life of a society. Culture has a very broad definition. It's no longer just philosophy and art and literature and architecture and so on. It is the entire pattern of living in a society. And it extends from the most respected people to the preoccupations of the lowest and how all these are represented and how they evolve. In recent times, study in history has expanded from just knowing about the groups with high status, such as the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas, the kings and the aristocracy, the Vaishyas, the traders and the landowners. It's expanded to knowing more about the Shudras who provided the labor for each category. Then, a little later, a still lower category was studied and is continuing to be studied, that of what we call the Avarna, those without a caste status. Their lowness was emphasized by treating them as untouchable, some groups of them, the Asprishya. Historians today do not focus only on kings and battles and political events. They have expanded their study to include all the groups that constitute a society. History is no longer the study of only the elite groups, but has to include all the different groups, high and low, that made up a society. History also tells us that societies are not static. It's not that they're created once and they stay like that century after century. They change constantly from century to century due to many reasons. Societies change, and the change creates new historical features. So the historian has to ask the question, what causes this change? And this becomes a fundamental question in the study of all aspects of life and patterns of living. Students have to understand that in studying history, they are also comprehending why societies have changed in the past and are therefore likely to change in the future too. Our present conditions are not permanent conditions, we can change them. Many factors are responsible for this social change. To take one example, technology plays a major role in bringing about change in society. Historically, societies began with a simple technology in everything they did, and gradually they improved the material of the technology. Initially, they used stone, but gradually discovered metals such as bronze and iron. And in this process of changing technology, they improved the technology that they were making. And all this helped in improving the conditions of life. Another basic question relates to the changes that are registered in distinguishing, for example, the culture of a village from the culture of a city. The village is a small settlement with only a few layers of social difference. The city is both more complex in its pattern of living, and its many technologies are much more sophisticated. Historians register the difference. Where culture is the label referring to any pattern of living, civilization strictly only applies to cultures that have cities and that keep written records. Further, remember that cities don't grow their own food, they obtain it from the rural countryside and from villages. The city has a large population of people who are traders and involved in exchange of various items and goods. Therefore, cities also have large numbers of artisans and craftsmen. And these conditions have to exist before an area can be called a civilization. The student should also understand the link between material culture and technology, as well as the cultural values that enrich a society. In fact, there is a tremendous emphasis in history on the humanitarian aspect, the ethics and the culture, the values of society. And this can be understood if the student is encouraged to ask as many questions as he or she wishes to. The asking of questions on the point of students is absolutely crucial to the process of education, which is why sometimes it's said that online education is not very conducive to improving the mind of the student, because the ability to question and seek answers and have a discussion is extremely limited. It also means that the teacher has to be competent in answering these questions. Teachers, therefore, have to be very carefully and fully trained, not only by giving them access to knowledge and information on a subject, but by making them comprehend how knowledge is used. This is crucial to producing reasonably intelligent teachers. When, in later life, many of us speak appreciatively of schooling and our years of schooling, these are invariably associated with periods when the teachers were good and we learned from good teachers. The next item of importance in a history textbook is training students to understand the meaning of what we call historical sources and how different categories of sources are used. For many centuries, societies remained unaware of writing, and would remember everything orally. So the oral tradition is significant, but is different from a written tradition. It should not be treated with contempt, but one should also know what the positive and negative aspects of an oral tradition are in relation also to a written tradition. So the oral tradition is significant and should not be treated as something very casually. But as with the written tradition, it has to be tested for reliability. For the earliest periods of history, what we call ancient India, to begin with, only archaeological sources are available. And this means an emphasis on material culture, namely showing how people lived. And such societies tend to be simple in their patterns of living. But when societies become more complex, then the keeping of records becomes important. And often this coincides with the invention of writing. How do you keep records? You keep records by either remembering or by writing them down. And many scripts were invented as different societies had different ways of writing what they thought was relevant. And with all these past records, the primary questions that we ask as historians are: who is the author? What is the background of the author? What is the purpose of the record? Who is the audience? And how reliable is this record as evidence of the past? These questions have to be asked of every source of history, whether it is the study of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, whether it is the study of the Arthashastra, whether it is the study of the Rajatarangani, whether it is the study of Kabir or Surdas or the chronicles of the Persian chronicles of the later period. I call these the 3 A's: authorship, agenda, audience. And the source may be the recitation of an epic, a long poem handed down, or it can be an inscription on a pot, on a rock, on a piece of stone, or a piece of writing in a book. Students, therefore, have to be taught why such questions are necessary and how to answer them. This is the beginning of the writing of history. The epic, such as the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, is not the same as an inscription. These are two very different categories of sources. An inscription generally has a date, a precise date, unlike the oral tradition, which has a huge span, a chronological span of many centuries. The inscription records events, generally political, and other thoughts of rulers. Sometimes the thoughts have a touch of philosophical ideas, such as the edicts of Ashoka. At other times, they are largely dynastic history, such as the Prashasti of Samudragupta, referring to his genealogy and his conquests. There may be exaggerations in these records, there often are, but historians are then trained to examine the generations, the exaggerations, and to arrive at what we call authentic, reliable evidence. What do we mean by this? Evidence that is proven evidence. This is extremely important. And the language of the texts of past times is in itself a source of information. And the discipline of linguistics today, which historians, especially of the ancient period and the medieval period, have to use, and it's becoming important even in a lot of early modern writing, tells us a great deal about the history of the language and the sociology of the language. Who's using it and who's the audience? What does it intend to say? And linguistic studies have been extremely helpful in informing us of which language influenced another language if there is evidence of influence. For example, it is now argued on the basis of linguistic studies that the Indo-Aryan of Vedic texts has a few elements in it that point to some incorporation of characteristics of Dravidian. What does this mean? This is not just a bit of proof and evidence in language. It's historically extremely important because what it means is that it suggests that both speakers of Indo-Aryan and Dravidian lived in the same area, and there appears to have been a cultural interaction. And this is really a very new way of looking at the history of the early past. And this possibility is now also being investigated through genetic data gathered from DNA. And it relates to the big debate that is going on as to whether the Indo-Aryan speakers migrated in small groups over a long period of time from Central Asia into northern India, or whether in fact they were indigenous. Historians use a very large range of sources, and these have increased gradually in more recent periods of time. And this is because much more has survived from the past and much more can be retrieved today. We have ways and methods of retrieving information from the past, much more extensive than, say, 100 years ago. So inevitably, if there are more sources and more information, the way in which we reconstruct history is also beginning to change. And we turn very frequently to what are now called scientific methods of investigation. For example, the use, which has been there for many, many decades now, the use of carbon dating for chronology. And instead of just adding numbers from here and there is something much more specific. And more recently, of course, there has been this very exciting use of laser technology to discover what lies beneath the ground at many sites. The ultimate question, therefore, remains. It is linked to the first question that I asked. Why do we study history? How does history give us an understanding of the past? This is dependent on how we reconstruct the societies of the past from the evidence that we have. And I underline the word evidence, reliable, proven evidence, not the fantasies and mythologies that we may have for the past. Fantasies and mythologies are fine to encourage imaginative pictures, but if you're looking for history, your evidence has to be reliable, proven and reliable. The function of history is not just to illustrate stray incidents, but to fit events into giving us a picture of the past. However, it has to be as authentic as possible. And the method of studying history is common to all the social sciences and to a great degree to the sciences as well. It is important because it distinguishes the trained historian who bases historical study on proven evidence from the person who casually picks up information from here and there and concocts an largely imagined narrative of what might have happened. There is a distinction between these two categories of people, and we mustn't confuse them as we have been confusing them in many public pronouncements that are made these days about the history of this country. We have to be very, very careful that if we're going to talk about history, we have it absolutely on surety and evidence that what we are saying is proven and is correct. It is dependent, therefore, on what we call a historical method. What is the method? The student of history must first gather all the possible information from as many sources as are available on which to base the reconstruction of past society. The information must then be sifted, and only that which comes from a reliable source becomes the basis of history. The other is set aside. A story from mythology cannot be described as historical if there is no proven evidence for it, no matter how attractive the story may be. This is a lesson which today's public speakers and people who participate on public platforms and quote history, this is a lesson that they must learn from historians. It is absolutely crucial. History is a narrative of connected events. So the next step is that the links that are made between what happened, how it happened, has to be based on logical and rational thinking. Thus, gradually, a reliable narrative can be constructed, and such a narrative provides a far more credible explanation of the past than the stories that abound in the speeches that are often made by public figures or in popular magazines and so on. And this is what is meant, let me repeat and underline, this is what is meant when it is said that the historians have not only to be trained to examine the sources they use, but also in the causal connections. B comes out of A is linked to B, which have to be based on logic and reason. Now, the kind of curriculum that is often, I'm concluding with a statement on the NEP, the kind of curriculum that is being put forward is a curriculum that pays very little attention, I would say no attention, to what I've been speaking about. If a history textbook can convey these ideas, and the kinds of textbooks that are coming into use now with the NEP certainly don't base themselves on these ideas. But if a history textbook can convey these ideas and history teachers can explain them to students, which means very fine-tuned quality in training history teachers, then, only then, shall we have a generation of intelligent and thoughtful students who both enjoy and understand why they study history. And these are the kinds of students that will then grow up to be educated, meaningful, worthwhile citizens of India. Thank you very much.
Much, Professor Romila Thapar. You have dealt different aspects on history, why, how the change created, comprehend how society changed earlier and how it would change in future. And you also very much emphasized on how proof and evidence and reliable source of evidence should be history should be based on that. And I think the present syllabus writers who belong to the song porivars don't know, not only know, they are completely unaware, completely ignorant of all this. So again, I thank you very much. And you have already seen that the program is going on from three auditoriums. One is in Delhi, this is in Kolkata, and another one is in Chennai. And I also now you will take over you to Chennai. And before that, I like to announce that tomorrow's session will start from 11, and the link for that tomorrow will be only online and the link for that will be circulated after 2 p.m. today. Now I take you over to Chennai. Professor A. Korudananthan, former professor and HOD History, Vivekananda Arts and Science College. He will speak from Chennai Auditorium. Professor Thapar spoke from Delhi. I invite Professor A. Korudananthan. Uh, Please unmute. Please unmute. Professor Korudananthan, please unmute. It is muted. Professor Korudananthan, it is muted. Please unmute. Professor Thilagod, the mic is muted. Professor Thilagod, mic is muted. Professor Korudananthan, please unmute. Professor, Professor Thilagod. Professor Thilagod, take care of it. Unmute. Unmute the mic.
So in a democratic country, we feel that still India is a democratic country. We have a democratic constitution. In a democracy, everyone, every organization has a right to dissent, has a right to protest, and further has a right to resist, leading the resistance leading to rejection of the particular policy. We are exercising our democratic rights in dissenting, protesting, and resisting the national education policy. There are several points upon which we express our criticism, our opposition to this national education policy. There are very many points, but I will concentrate on a few for the sake of brevity. Our Republican Constitution originally listed education in the state list. So it is up to the states to evolve an education policy. As a welfare government, the union government can do something to coordinate, to assist, and to suggest certain reforms in the education. All the commissions which were constituted since our independence, hence had made only recommendations. They never made dictations. But this is the only policy which is not bothered about recommendations, which imposes its will as a policy to be adopted by every state. This goes against the very spirit of the Constitution. Absolute centralization of education. Absolute centralization. Not only educational institutions, educational apparatus, the whole educational apparatus is being centralized. Today in the Hindu, you could have seen news. Anbil Poyamudi, the school education minister, gives a statement to the press stating that one joint director of school education is being transferred because, with utter disregard to the state's opposition to the new education policy, he circulates a message from the central ministry to inviting application from the teachers for a training course in a cultural program. The central government or union government can now directly invite state teachers, the teachers who were funded by the state government, to get trained themselves in a particular cultural program. This is one thing. Though, hence, it goes against the constitutional federalism. And then it goes against the cultural pluralism. The entire national education policy is meant to corporatize the education and to communalize the education. Corporatization, communalizations are the two aspects of the new education policy. Under the new scheme, education becomes expensive, and education is controlled by the center, union government. The state education departments are expected to be auxiliary bodies of the union government. This is a very dangerous trend. It goes against the pluralism, cultural pluralism, linguistic pluralism of the Indian setup. They are emphasizing more on quality and cultural understanding of India. In their way, they are dictating to all the states what is to be considered as Indian culture. There is no scope for the culture, the acceptance of cultures of the regions, of the languages, of the religions. They try to make everything subordinated to the Sanskrit-oriented, the Brahminical culture. And they describe this as accepting the pluralism of India. Pluralism is based on equality. Equality cannot be confined to equality among individuals. Equality goes beyond that. Equality among societies, equality among states, equality among religions. So the equality is to be extended to various fields. Here, that equality is subverted by this new education policy. As the distinguished historians Irfan Habib and Romila Thapar had already given detailed description of what they are doing in the Indian history. Now even the syllabus is dictated by the central government. What to be taught in the classrooms are decided by the bureaucrats. Absolute centralization leads to absolute bureaucratization of education system. There is no room for the educators, the scholars, the teachers to have an effective role in the policy making. They are made instruments. They had no say in the institutions. The universities lose their autonomy. They can no longer decide the curriculum. They can no longer decide the syllabus. They are all decided by a bureaucratic body, UGC now. So if they can do the syllabus making and curriculum making, what is the use of, what is the relevance of the state universities, state education departments? Is it granting autonomy or usurping the state's rights by the bureaucrats of the central agencies? So on this count, I feel that we have to be very vociferous in protesting and resisting and even rejecting the national education policy. Today, this day, and this time, the governor of Tamil Nadu, as chancellor of universities of Tamil Nadu, is convening a meeting of the vice chancellors. What is his role? How can he convene a meeting of the vice chancellors? The chancellor's role or the governor's role is a de jure role, ornamentation. They are not de facto authorities, they are de jure authorities. As the President of India is to be considered, the President of India is a de jure authority. He cannot dictate anything to the central ministers, central ministries. He cannot call individual secretaries of the departments for consultation or for clarification. Can the President of India, Govind, call for a meeting of the statements from them? What they are inviting reports from the state departments, convening meeting of vice chancellors. Is it autonomy? Is it academic autonomy? He is dictating what to be done. The vice chancellors are now under the control of dual authorities, the state government and the union government. The union government controls through the governor. Knowing very well the depth of resources in the state government, the vice chancellors are mostly in favor of the central intervention. Even today, the Madras University had introduced courses, online courses. All the courses were online courses. And who gave this idea? Did the Academic Council of the Madras University suggest these online courses? No. He receives instructions from the central ministry and he introduces departments. Unfortunately, till date, the state government has not reacted to it. We hope that the state government would react appropriately, adequately in the coming days. So they are subverting the constitution. They are subverting federalism. They are subverting cultural pluralism in India. Without the state's autonomy is granted, acknowledged, the cultural pluralism will have no meaning. The states represent particular segments of society, and it represents linguistic interest, cultural interest. If the state's rights are being eroded by the new education policies, what would happen to the federal structure of India? Even the union, the word union will be eroded. It will be removed by an ordinance by the central government. Hereafter, India will be a unitary state. India will not be a union of states. So this conversion from transformation from federalism to unitarianism is more explicit in the field of education. And the education, educated people are involved. Educated people should have the awareness, should have the courage to resist what is evil, what is anti-federal, what is anti-constitution. If the educated people fail the society, then the history will not forgive them. The educated audience, they are privileged ones. In a country like India, not all the people are educated. Not all the people are holding postgraduate degrees. So such educated people are supposed to be the conscience keepers of the society. If the educated people, their representatives, they are in various positions, fail to react to this anti-constitutional national education policy 2020, then they will be considered as accomplices in a constitutional crime. So we expect this education committee to carry on this message. Are we going to seek for amendments to the national education policy? Or are we going to seek for the rejection of the policy? It is up to us to decide. Are we going to be content with a few changes? Some people say that we oppose only the language policy. Some people say that we oppose the entrance test. But the national education policy has more toxic content in it than these two issues. These two issues are very important. I don't reject it. I don't deny that. But there are more toxic content in the national education policy, if it is allowed, India will be converted into a fascist state, a unitary state, fascist state, a majoritarian state, and that will be wrecking our interest in future. So this resistance to national education policy in an organized way by this committee is not mere on an educational issue. It is a national issue. It is a federal issue. It is a secular issue. It is a democratic issue. So in order to save the state, save the democratic, secular, federal content of the state, we'll have to rise up and see that this disastrous policy is rejected once for all. Thank you for the opportunity.
Professor Korodhananthan, you are very right that by centralization, corporatization, and communalization of education, and and making everything subordinate to Sanskrit-dominated Brahmanical culture, there will be a fascist. This state will become a fascistic state. So this education policy should be rejected completely. Okay, thank you. Now I will invite Professor Sachidanand Sinha. He is Professor, Center for the Study of Regional Development, School of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal Nehru University, and he will address from JNU. I request Professor Sachidanand Sinha.
Thank you very much. My apologies for not making it to the venue of this campaign today, which has started, which has been going on for a fairly long period of time. Because of some illness in my family, I'll have to be next to the person. So my apologies to all the listeners. Various speakers, and I have not been in a position to follow the presentations since morning. So please forgive me if I tend to repeat some of those things. But, whatever little that I could gather, I think, the presentations have really touched upon various dimensions of the new education policy. And सो मेरे ख्याल से अब मैं हिंदी में बोलूँगा, क्योंकि मुझे यही कहा गया था आयोजकों की तरफ से कि मैं अपनी बात हिंदी में रखूं। तो बिना अधिक समय लिए हुए मैं आपका ध्यान कुछ चुनिंदा मुद्दों पे आकर्षित करूंगा, जो न्यू एजुकेशन पॉलिसी का बहुत ही जो मेरे ख्याल से जो समाज के और हमारे इंडिपेंडेंस के जो एम्बिशंस थे, उनके जो ऑब्जेक्टिव्स थे, जो ये उसमें माना गया था कि शिक्षा के प्रसार के साथ साथ हम हिंदुस्तान में जो एक स्ट्रक्चरल डेफिशिएंसी है, इनइक्वालिटी है, उसको हम बहुत हद तक एड्रेस कर पाएंगे, उस बहुत हद तक हम वहाँ पहुँच पाएंगे। और उस दिशा में हमारे पिछले कुछ सालों से, वर्षों से जो भी आयोजन हुए हैं, उसमें कमियां रही हैं। लेकिन उसके साथ ही साथ ये कहते हुए मुझे इसमें कोई दो राय नहीं है कि हम कहाँ थे और हम आज कहाँ पहुँचे हैं। और ख़ास करके हमारे जैसे समाज में, जहाँ पे हर स्तर पे कहीं ना कहीं रुकावटें होती हैं, आप अपने स्थिति को बदलने की कोशिश करें तो उसमें, उसके रास्ते में बहुत सारी रुकावटें हैं, जो कि हमारे इस स्तरीय सोसाइटी में, समाज में, लोकल समाज में हर लेवल पे देखने को मिलता है। और उस जद्दोजहद से जब कोई भी बच्चा, जब कोई शिक्षा ग्रहण करना चाहता है, अपने आप को सोशली मोबाइल करने की कोशिश करना चाहता है, अपनी इकोनॉमिक स्थिति को को बेहतर बनाने की कोशिश करता है, जिसका संवैधानिक रूप से उसे हर तरह के इस तरह के प्रयासों के लिए आमंत्रित किया जाता है, फिर भी हम देखते हैं कि जिस तरह से इनका कार्यान्वयन होता रहा है उसमें अड़चने रही हैं, और ये अड़चने केवल निम्न वर्गीय समाज तक ही शामिल नहीं है, लेकिन अगर हम देखें तो उत्तरोत्तर नीचे से ऊपर की तरफ एक ऐसी सीढ़ी नुमा व्यवस्था है कि कुछ लोग कुछ सीढ़ी तक पहुंच पाते हैं, उसके आगे नहीं जा पाते हैं। इस जो नई शिक्षा नीति है, और मुझे चूंकि 10 मिनट का समय है तो मैं इसमें अपनी बात को कहने की कोशिश करूंगा। ये मेरे ख्याल से ये समाज विरोधी ही नहीं है, ये विकास का जो भी मॉडल आप तैयार करें उसमें आपको मिलेगा कि जब तक हम एजुकेशन को इंक्लूसिव नहीं बनाएंगे तब तक शायद इसमें कोई बदलाव की संभावना नहीं है। ये ऐसा क्यों है कि ये एजुकेशन पॉलिसी स्कूल से लेके हायर एजुकेशन तक की जो पूरी की पूरी ये जो निजामी व्यवस्था है, इसमें ये कहना क्या चाहता है, बोलता क्या है, और इसके पीछे की मंशा उसकी क्या है, इस बात को समझना हमारे लिए बहुत जरूरी है। आप टेक्स्ट को पढ़ेंगे, आपको लगेगा कि भाई हम तो शायद हम विक्रमशिला और तक्षशिला जैसे विश्वविद्यालय की स्थापना कर रहे हैं, शायद हम पता नहीं किस समाज की बात कर रहे हैं। और हम ऐसा कहते समय हम ये सोचने पे मजबूर हो जाते हैं, और हमको मजबूर किया जाता है जिस तरह का आयोजन इसमें और जिस तरह के जो टेक्सचुअल कंटेंट है उससे जो हमको मिलता है कि साहब ये तो अभी हमने बहुत प्रसार कर लिया, बहुत विकास कर लिया, लेकिन उसमें जो है गुणवत्ता की कमी है। गुणवत्ता का मामला जो है वो जिस तरह से यह शिक्षा नीति हमारे सामने लाने की कोशिश कर रही है, हम सभी महसूस करते हैं कि गुणवत्ता जो है वो बहुत सारे कारणों से संपादित होती है, और गुणवत्ता एजुकेशन में यानी कि एजुकेशनल क्वालिटी में केवल गुणवत्ता इसलिए नहीं है और उसकी कमी इसलिए है क्योंकि हमारे सामने बहुत सारे स्कूल और कॉलेजेस खुल गए हैं, और जिसमें उन लोगों को, उन तमाम सारे समाज के अलग अलग विभिन्न वर्गों को उसमें हिस्सेदारी करने का मौका मिलता है। तो सबसे पहला, जिसलिए मैंने कहा इसको डी स्कूलिंग सोसाइटी, हालांकि ये शब्द मैंने एक बहुत ही 60s 70s के बहुत ही व्यापक थिंकर के सौजन्य से लिया है, लेकिन मैं इसको डी स्कूलिंग सोसाइटी इसलिए कर रहा हूं क्योंकि ये शिक्षा नीति दो तरह के कार्य करने पे आमादा है। नंबर एक कि वो शुरू से ही इस तरह का कंट्रोल बनाना चाहता है ताकि आप उत्तरोत्तर आपका बच्चा जो है वो 3री 5वीं 7वीं से या तो बाहर हो जाए, या अगर बाहर नहीं हो पाएगा तो उसको ओपन स्कूल या इस तरह के माध्यम से, यानी कि फेस टू फेस जो मेन स्ट्रीम एजुकेशन है और उसमें जिस तरह की बात ये करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं उसमें शायद उसको जगह नहीं मिलेगी। यानी कि कुछ लोगों के बच्चे जो कि परंपरागत रूप से एक प्रॉपर्टीड क्लास हैं, उनको ये मौका मिलेगा, उनको बच्चों को मौका मिलेगा। यानी कि जो अभी हमने जो कुछ भी हासिल किया है, समानता की ओर जो भी हमारे कदम बढ़े हैं, चाहे आधे कदम चाहे पूरे कदम, लेकिन उसमें एक फिर से कमजोरी आने वाली है। और वो आप देख सकते हैं हायर एजुकेशन के भी फ्रेमवर्क में, आप देख सकते हैं आज के जमाने में किस तरह से हम इस पूरे निजाम को संपादित कर रहे हैं। यहाँ पे एक एग्जामिनेशन, वहां पे एक एग्जामिनेशन, मतलब हर लेवल पे केवल एग्जामिनेशन हो रहे हैं। पढ़ाई की कहाँ बात हो रही है और इसका गुणवत्ता से क्या संबंध है, ये जरा सा सबसे पहली बात कि गुणवत्ता के इस पूरे डॉक्यूमेंट में जो न्यू एजुकेशन पॉलिसी है उसमें गुणवत्ता के नाम पे केवल एम्प्टी वर्ड्स, हॉलो वर्ड्स की बात हुई है, और उसमें कहीं कोई सब्सटैंटिव सब्सटैंटिव एफर्ट नहीं दिखता। इसी से मुझे पता चलता है, और ये मेरा अपना व्यक्तिगत समझ है, और शिक्षा के क्षेत्र में जो भी मैंने काम किए हैं उससे मैं ये समझता हूँ कि ये एक बहुत ही रिएक्शनरी और प्रतिकूलात्मक एक दस्तावेज है जो बच्चों को, समाज के विभिन्न वर्गों को के बच्चों को आगे नहीं बढ़ने देगा। इसका स्ट्रक्चर ही इस तरह से है कि ये कभी इंक्लूसिव हो ही नहीं सकता। ये एक्सक्लूजनरी पॉलिसी है, ये सेग्रीगेशन की पॉलिसी है। अभी हम देख सकते हैं कि कैसे सेग्रीगेशन हमारे समाज में है, कौन सरकारी विद्यालयों में जाता है और कौन गैर सरकारी विद्यालयों में जाता है। अभी आपने सुना होगा, और मेरे ख्याल से इसकी रूपरेखा पिछले 5 साल से चल रही है। अलग अलग स्टेट्स में हमारे बाकी सारे मित्रों ने फेडरलिज्म की बात की। फेडरलिज्म के परिप्रेक्ष्य में एजुकेशन जो है वो प्राइमरीली स्टेट सब्जेक्ट है, और ज्यादा से ज्यादा खर्च भी स्टेट गवर्नमेंट्स करते हैं। लेकिन अब इस नए निजाम में उनकी भी स्वतंत्रता, उनका वो फेडरल इंडिपेंडेंस किस हद तक कायम रह पाएगा, वो आप अगर गौर से पूरे 500 पन्ने के उनके ड्राफ्ट पॉलिसी को ना भी पढ़ें तो कम से कम 66 पन्नों की उस पॉलिसी को गहराई से देखें, और मैं समझता हूं कि ये ऐसी पॉलिसी है, इससे ज्यादा रिएक्शनरी पॉलिसी हिंदुस्तान में कभी भी नहीं सोची गई। और ये बिल्कुल खुलेआम तौर से कहा जा रहा है कि आपको पढ़ने की जो जरूरत नहीं है, आपको वैचारिक चिंतन की जरूरत नहीं है, आप केवल एक ट्रेन्ड स्किल्ड मैन पावर के तौर पे बिना सोचे समझे, आपको सोचने की जरूरत नहीं है, आपको तर्क की जरूरत नहीं है, आपको केवल एक रोबोट चाहिए। और ये जो न्यू लिबरल निजाम है जो पूरे विश्व में फैला हुआ है, और आप देख सकते हैं कि जो वर्ल्ड बैंक की जो एजुकेशन पॉलिसी है, ये बिल्कुल उसको मानते हुए, इसमें केवल एक एडिशन ये हुआ है कि इसने एक ब्राह्मणिज्म, जो ब्राह्मणिकल आइडियोलॉजी है, जो एक्सक्लूजनरी आइडियोलॉजी है, उसको बहुत ही जोर शोर से और बहुत ही एक ऐसे तरीके से कहा जा रहा है जो कि जिस तरीके में मेरे ख्याल से हमारा समाज जो है वो बिल्कुल इसमें परांगत उसको है कि जो कहता है वो करता नहीं है, और जो करता है वो लिखता नहीं है। जो लिखता है उसका मतलब कुछ और निकलता है, लेकिन करता कुछ और है। तो यानी कि ये जो पूरा का पूरा जो आयोजन है एजुकेशन का, उसमें आप देख सकते हैं कि कैसे बहुत सारे स्टेट्स के अंदर, राजस्थान में, गुजरात में, मध्य प्रदेश में, झारखंड में कितने सारे स्कूलों को बंद किया गया जा रहा है। वो इसलिए किया जा रहा है क्योंकि वो कहते हैं अनइकोनॉमिक है, उनको सरकार जो है ना उनका खर्चा वहन नहीं कर सकती है। मध्य प्रदेश में अखबारी स्रोतों से मुझे पता है कि करीबन 1,15,000 हाई स्कूल है, जो भी जितने भी स्कूल्स हैं उसमें से केवल 15,000 स्कूल बचेंगे सरकारी क्षेत्र में, बाकी सबको जो है वो बंद कर दिया जाएगा या प्राइवेटाइजेशन के हाथ में, प्राइवेट सेक्टर के हाथ में दे दिया जाएगा। सो इट इज नॉट सिंपली अ क्वेश्चन ऑफ प्राइवेट एजुकेशन, इट्स अ क्वेश्चन, ये एक तरह का ऐसा सवाल है जो कि उसके साथ ही साथ वो जो प्रॉपर्टी है, वो जो स्कूल की जो प्रॉपर्टी है, जो लैंड की प्रॉपर्टी है, पूरा जो इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर है, जैसा कि आप देख रहे हैं जो भी हमने सरकारी क्षेत्र में जो भी इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर तैयार किया है, तो उसी को हम बेच रहे हैं। और ये उसी तरह की व्यवस्था है जिसमें सरकार जो है, इसको हम नहीं कह सकते कि अब ये वेलफेयर स्टेट है, ये बिल्कुल कैपिटलिस्ट स्टेट है, ये कैपिटलिज्म के हर कदम पे उनके साथ है। तो प्राइवेटाइजेशन का जो मामला है एजुकेशन के संदर्भ में, स्कूल में अभी तक हमने देखा है कि चाहे सरकारी विद्यालयों में अमीर बच्चों की शिरकत, प्रॉपर्टीड क्लासेस की शिरकत ना हो, क्योंकि वो हमेशा से आइडियोलॉजिकली एक्सक्लूजनरी, वो तबका ही एक्सक्लूजनरी रहा है, उसको इससे मतलब ही नहीं है। आई मीन कि आप जो हमारे संवैधानिक विचारों को वो किसी तरह से इज्जत दे सके। आज तो निजाम भी उसी तरह का है जो कि हमारे संवैधानिक विचारों के नाम पे वो एक्सक्लूजन कर रहा है, और ये प्राइवेटाइजेशन एजुकेशन के जो क्षेत्र में होने वाला है और जो चल रहा है, ऑलरेडी चल रहा है, और ये तो क्रिया तभी शुरू हो गया था, उसके पहले शुरू हो गया था जब 2020 में हमने इसको नई एजुकेशन पॉलिसी को हमारी सरकार ने एक्सेप्ट किया था, और वो भी पैंडेमिक के समय में एक्सेप्ट किया था, जिसमें कहीं कोई विमर्श ना हो सके, कहीं कोई प्रतिरोध ना हो सके, कहीं कोई इस पे ज्यादा बातें ना हो सके। फिर भी आपने जिस तरह से इस पूरे परचम को आगे रखा है, मेरे ख्याल से हमको फिर एक बार मिलजुल के उन त्रुटियों की तरफ ध्यान देना है और उस दिशा में काम करना है, ताकि कम से कम ये जो चीजें जो मैं आपको आपके सामने रखना चाहता हूं। एक तो जो कि पैंडेमिक के समय में हमारे लाखों बच्चे स्कूल से बाहर हो गए हैं, उसके साथ ही साथ स्कूल बंद किए जा रहे हैं, तो वो जो समस्या और गहरी होने वाली है और हो गई है, उसमें उसके बारे में सरकार को कोई चिंता नहीं है। सरकार उसके बारे में कोई आयोजन नहीं कर रही है, कहीं आपने सुना नहीं होगा। वो इस चक्कर में है कि स्कूलों को बंद किया जाए और कैसे कैसे कुछ लोगों के लिए क्वालिटी एजुकेशन का आयोजन किया जाए, चाहे वो ग्रुप ऑफ इंस्टीट्यूशन को इंटीग्रेट करके किया जाए या किसी तरह की दूसरी व्यवस्था करके किया जाए। मेरे ख्याल से खास करके जनजातीय इलाकों में, छोटे गांवों में, जो दूर दराज के इलाके हैं, जो हिली एरियाज हैं, उसमें एक बहुत बड़ा चैलेंज आने वाला है। और यही वो ज्यादातर इलाके रहे हैं ट्रेडिशनली जहाँ पे साक्षरता की भी कमी है, जहाँ पे विलेज में लोगों का एजुकेशन में पार्टिसिपेशन भी कमजोर है। शहरों की बात मैं नहीं कर रहा हूँ, शहरों में तो ऑलरेडी प्राइवेटाइजेशन एक बड़े पैमाने पे हो चुका है, लेकिन उसमें भी शायद बदलाव की जरूरत है। एक जो उम्मीद की किरण हमें नजर आ रही है वो ये है कि पैंडेमिक के दौरान काफी सारे बच्चों और पेरेंट्स जिनकी आमदनी का स्रोत खत्म हो गया था, वो फिर से सरकारी विद्यालयों की तरफ वापस आ रहे हैं। लेकिन जब सरकारी विद्यालय ही नहीं रहेंगे तो फिर वो कहाँ जाएंगे? तो फाइनली what you are likely to have is a situation where we could be saying okay, we are against child labor. हमको मालूम है कि चाइल्ड लेबर पे जितनी भी हम बात कर लें, लेकिन हम जानते हैं कि चाइल्ड लेबर की जरूरत है। चाइल्ड लेबर पे अभी भी सरकार चाहे कुछ भी कहे, लेकिन चाइल्ड लेबर हो रहा है। जरूरत तो मैं नहीं कह सकता कि है कि नहीं है, लेकिन चाइल्ड लेबर चल रहा है। तो बच्चे स्कूल जाएंगे और नहीं जाएंगे तो वो फिर खेत में मजदूरी करेंगे या कहीं और मजदूरी करेंगे, और वो चीप लेबर का स्रोत बनेंगे, ताकि कैपिटलिस्ट को वही काम कम दाम पे करवाने से ज्यादा मुनाफा हो सके। द इंटरनेशनल कैपिटल इज इन अ ग्रेट हरी। वो इंतजार नहीं करना चाहता और वो बिल्कुल प्रेशर डाले हुए है। ये एक बहुत बड़ी चुनौती हम सबों के सामने है, चाहे वो हायर एजुकेशन का मामला हो, चाहे वो स्कूल एजुकेशन का मामला हो। मेरा ज्यादातर संबंध स्कूली एजुकेशन से है, और मैं ये बिल्कुल आपको डेटा के आधार पे कह सकता हूं कि आने वाले दिनों में एक बहुत बड़ा तबका स्कूलों से बाहर होगा, फेस टू फेस एजुकेशन से बाहर होगा, और इसलिए सरकार की इस मंशा को हमें रोकने की जरूरत है। स्कूलों को बंद करने से हमको रोकने की जरूरत है। रैशनलाइजेशन के नाम पे और क्वालिटी के नाम पे जो किया जा रहा है, ये दोनों दो अलग अलग चीजें हैं। अगर हमको क्वालिटी एजुकेशन की बात करनी है तो बताए सरकार, बताए ये दस्तावेज कि यहाँ पे क्वालिटी के बारे में उसने कौन कौन से कदम उठाए हैं और किस तरह के कदम उठाने जा रही हैं। तो मेरे ख्याल से इन्हीं थोड़े शब्दों के साथ मैं अपनी बात को ही खत्म करूंगा, और मैं आप सबों का से फिर से माफी मांगना चाहूंगा कि मैं इस प्रोसेस में आज के समय में उपस्थित नहीं हो सका। बड़ी ख्वाहिश थी कि आज मैं आप लोगों के बीच होता और इस बात को आपके सामने रखता। धन्यवाद, शुक्रिया। थैंक यू वेरी मच।
Thank you very much, Professor Swachinanda Sinha. We have seen in the introduction of the policy that there are so many high sounding words to befool and misguide the people. And if we read in between the lines, we can find actually what are there. And you have rightly commented that what they say they don't do, and what they do, they don't say. And it is a completely reactionary document, not inclusive but completely exclusionary policy. So, thank you very much again. Then I will invite Professor Chandrasekhar Chakraborty. He is president of All Bengal Safe Education Committee. He is former vice chancellor of West Bengal University of Animal and Fisheries Sciences. I request Professor Chakraborty.
Friends, by this time you have heard many information from very prominent persons from different parts of India, and I would like to highlight only a few points because our time is very much limited. NEP, the main theme for our discussion, I would like to use three words here. N, it is obviously national, not education, but I am telling you this is new or national erroneous policy. It can be considered as national encroaching policy. It can be considered as a national egoistic policy, because all these things, what words I have used, has already been mentioned by all the eminent speakers by this time. Now, I would like to mention few things here very briefly, that you know in the documents what is NEP 2020. There is a small background. The then MHRD Minister Sriti Irani ji, she formed a committee in 2015, and that committee was chaired by the then Cabinet Secretary TSR Subramaniam. And then this present committee, what is now known as the New Education Policy Making Committee, that was formed under the chairmanship of Dr. K. Kasturi Rangan, the ex-ISRO chief. But this is the first time, possibly, that a person who is not directly associated in the field of education for a long time, he chaired this very important committee. The committee, the draft, you know, it was placed in 2019. Many objections were made by different people or different organizations from all over India, but they did not give any importance on that, accepting recommendations of the central government's paid organization. Now, it is another very sad thing for us that this final recommendation was approved by the Cabinet Committee on 29th July. Incidentally, that was the 190th death anniversary of our great Pandit Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. Why I am telling that? In the long process of this particular recommendation, if you go through line by line, you will not find the name or recommendation or reference of Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, but references of many other people are there. Now, what was the purpose of this? Many points have been mentioned in the document, but very recently, the present higher education minister, now the MHRD is not there, central higher education minister, he has mentioned that the purpose is to shift from traditional learning towards flexible, equitable, and inclusive education to fulfill Modi's, remember, Modi government's principle building quality, equity, access, and affordability. From the previous lectures, you have heard a national policy should be a national one. From the national perspective, it should be democratic, it should be constitutional, it should not make any kind of discrimination. No government's name should be there. A government's view may be there, but it should remain in a hidden form, not in the forefront. But this is the first time a report has been made that was actually directed by the central government itself. So that has been already mentioned by the present Education Minister, Dharmendra Pradhan ji. Now, what was the aim of this? They have mentioned that we want to restore the past glories of India by application of modern tools and technologies to make workforce suitable for 21st century. Remember, we are not going to make any knowledgeable person. This education policy is not mentioning that we are going to make any knowledgeable person. We are going to make some workforce who will work for the benefit of somebody. Somebody means for some corporate sectors. If you go through the documents, you will see this is actually a manifesto of corporate sectors for their benefit only. Anyway, I am coming to the next one is that you see what is the main differences from the previous one, present one? Present one means you can say previous one because they have already introduced this policy without passing it or approving it in the parliament, which is very much undemocratic, definitely. The, the existing one, what we know that 10232 system is there, or rather it has been replaced by the proposed one, what they have mentioned that 5334 plus 3, then 4, 3 or 4, then 2. It will increase the total study period of a student. So what are the main divisions? School division and the higher education division. No higher secondary stage is not there. Remember, there will be no student of higher secondary stage. What are the main focus of the early part? That is the school education. They have introduced one very good terminology, ECCE. That is the early child care and education. Now, whose child will get care? That is the most important thing. They are saying that since the brain development starts at the age of 6 or before that, so we are devising that students should come in the school at the age of 3. Now, mostly in the rural areas, the students they come in class 1, but here they will be there before that. Now the question is, yes, this type of system is existing in the rural areas, in the urban areas. Yes, we send our boys and girls to the Montessori kindergartens and so that type of schools. This system is there, but now the students who are from the rural background, where they will get this study, that is the class 3 onward, they are proposing that yes, they will go to the Anganwaris and they will take lesson from there. So Anganwaris, you know everybody, the number of the Anganwaris at this moment, a number of the students that would be to take this lesson, there is no parity, number one. Number two, the Anganwari people who are there, they are not now teaching the students. They are not eligible for that also. Then if you say that yes, the Anganwaris will take good care, then we need to be equivalent to that of the Montessori and kindergartens which are taught by the teachers or prominent persons having much quality. What will happen then? A large number of students from the rural background will remain isolated from the educational stream. That is the purpose, as already been mentioned by other speakers also. Now, then another point is there. You see, what will be the teachers, the subdivisions of the school educations? You also know that there will be fundamental stage, or rather what is called foundational stage, is pre-school system starting from class 3 of age, then grade 1 and 2. Remember, there will be no class. You cannot tell in next time in which class do you read in. No, class will not be there. It will be grade. So the pre-primary, preschool for 3 years, then grade 1 and 2. What will be their main course curriculum? They will learn through play and games. Okay, what type of play and games? Who will make this curriculum? Again, there is a question. The NCERT or a body like that will make the syllabus for that thing. So, what is that? Just now you have heard that encroachment, the state subject, they are taking out from the state government. And surprisingly, including our state government, they are not making any kind of protest. They are making protest on different aspects or different issues, but they are not pointing this thing that you cannot enter into my area. So this is the thing. Then the preparatory preparatory stage, there will be grade 3, 4, 5. What will be their mood of or teaching or other curriculum? Light education. You will have to understand what is that. Medium will be mother tongue or local languages. Again, there is a question. There are so many mother tongues or so many local languages, more local language in this country. Now, if a student learn with these local languages, then when they will enter into higher education, or if the father or mother of that student migrates from one place to another place, in another state where the local language is not same, then what will happen with them? Nothing has been mentioned. Then come to the middle. Middle is very important, 6, 7, 8. What will be the subject matter? Social sciences, arts, sciences, and maths. These are the most important areas. Again, mother tongue will be there and local language will be the medium. Again, the problem will be there. Here is the social sciences, here is the arts sciences, here is the histories. You have already heard that what syllabus they are going to introduce. Already they have introduced in several states. Those matters which are not there in the history, there was no evidence. They have introduced that thing into the history topic. Then, very importantly, every year there will be no examination. They have mentioned that after grade 3, after grade 5 and grade 8, there will be an evaluation. Whether there will be pass-fail system or not, nothing has been mentioned. So many days you are fighting for pass-fail system that is not been mentioned in this syllabus. Then there will be a higher school grade 9, 10, 11 and 12. 4 years, remember. What are the new thing here? 8 semester. The first time the semester system is going to be introduced from that stage. Nowadays, who are learning in the colleges, now the colleges are not going on regularly, as you know, but still then, semester system has been introduced in the colleges. But what is the main problem is happening with the students with semester? If you discuss the problem with the students, you can easily understand. No regularity in the completion of the syllabus, no examination, no result, and only passing out. That is thing happening. So if semester is there in this 4-year course, then that will happen again. And here there will be another very important thing is there. There will be no division of art, science, commerce, etc. So far we know. In the 12th class, we know the student is interested with science stream. We have taken science groups or like that, arts or commerce like. Now, no, a student can take one subject of science, one from commerce, one from arts, whatever it may be. Now, the question is that, yes, this type of thing is there in some universities who have made this draft. They are associated, some of them are associated with those universities. So, yes, that may be there, but again, our All India General Secretary has mentioned that their system has failed, but we are inviting those systems here that yes, we will try with them. All the combination will be there. What is the purpose? You can easily understand. The student will not get any certificate in science, arts, or commerce. So they will not be able to enter into any arts, science, and commerce stream in the PG level. Then what will happen? They will not get a definite degrees after his passing out. Then they will not get any job specifically for that particular purpose. So that will be the thing may happen in future. So again, very bad thing is that there will be no final examination after class 10. So what will happen? We know at this moment after class 10, we consider that secondary is a very important thing. This first examination, the major examination the student face. And that degree is very important. Many jobs are there where we see that the specification is given that Madhyamik pass is essential. But there will be no Madhyamik examination. At a stage, there will be class 12, then examination final. And you can take your exit after class 10 with a certificate may be provided by the school, but what will happen with that I cannot understand, or that is a very question mark. Now after grade 8, remember again another thing is there, that so far they have learned languages local and or national, that what is called the mother tongue. From 8, 3 language formula will start. Remember, grade 3, 3 language formula. Sanskrit is a must. Then a classical and a foreign language course should be taken. That will be a duration of 2 years. Then where will be the Bengali? Where will be the Hindi? Where will be the English? Nothing has been mentioned in that way. Now, what will be the most important thing here? The traditional knowledge and artificial intelligence that will be introduced. Indian art, science, etc. will be there. Liberal arts that will make the whole thing as holistic and multidisciplinary. What we will achieve? We will achieve something, some old stories mentioned in Puranas, Upanishads, or some epics that will be there with that story. If that was true also, then what will we do now? If we consider that Arjuna was a very big fighter, he had a Gandiva. Will you get back that Gandiva nowadays? What will happen with that? We are saying that we are going to make people fit for 21st century. 21st century. Then, is it the need? Any American university will take you there, that can you know or can you utilize that Gandiva? I think no. If you say that I have learned from Taxila, will any university, Stanford or Oxford University, will take you there? Yes, you are a student of Taxila, so we will give you a big honor. No, you must be practical. If we consider that, yes, the Gandhari has given birth 100 children and all of them was test tube babies. If that was true, then you will have to prove that through experiment. That is not there. We do not want that. We will consider, yes, that will be syllabus. You will have to learn this. So that cannot be there. So what are the purpose then? The main purpose is digitization. Introduce all kind of these things. Means telephone, smartphone, smart class, computer based, intelligent based, robotic based. So a human mind cannot work. A student's mind cannot work. A robotic mind will guide the students, and the entire society will be run by the robotics. And already you have got ideas from several resources that the people are thinking that in a day, in the future will be this robotic world. A robotic empire will come and they will control the whole thing. Some companies, very big companies, Microsoft, then Google's and Telsa, they will control all these things. Yes, they are controlling. You are using smartphone, who are providing them? You are using connection, links, who are providing them? You are taking classes or you are sending your boys to take online classes, who are providing them? Some bodies has come up within the last 5 years, now they are billionaires providing online education. So online education is the actual aim behind this thing, and Corona has given a very good support to the central government, or rather central government has taken this corona as a very big shield for introducing this type of hegemony in the society. So already what has happened, you know, that a study has been made, and a prominent Professor Sukanta Chaudhuri has already reported that due to this corona period, or due to this, if the multiple exit and entry system is introduced, then the dropout will increase very rapidly. And in the last year during corona period, a study has been mentioned that 24 crores children miss school. Remember, 77% children have no access to online education. Then dropout will also increase in secondary level. Where the students will go? Child laborer, child trafficking. This will increase, and we are going to force the society to enter into that. We are not showing any light. This NEP is not showing any light. It is only showing darkness, and it is discriminatory at every point. So not only that, you will see that the teacher appointment, I am making short, there will be national eligibility test for teachers appointment. So state center, that relationship will not be there. Federal structure will be destroyed. Number one. Teachers promotion only on the basis of merit. No seniority will be considered. Then B.Ed, M.Ed and PhD degrees should be taken from the multidisciplinary institutes, not from standalone teachers training institute. That will be closed. Then school cluster will be formed. By 2025, it has been suggested that state government will make a cluster of schools. What is that? Under a secondary school, within area of 5 to 7 miles jurisdiction, all the primary schools should be taken together. You can think a good idea, but what is the good idea? That a teacher should run from one school to another school to make his or to keep his job, or to keep his or her job. That will happen. And what will happen with the students, we cannot understand. They are mentioning that there will be residential schools, boarding schools. We will provide money. If this is so, yes, money is there, we are thinking. No money has been mentioned. If 6% of the GDP is been given, that will not be sufficient. You can easily take a note that the budget allocation in the area of school education has been reduced by 5,000 crores from the existing budget. Anganwadi budget has been reduced by 4,500 crores. You are saying that everything will be taken away by look by the Anganwadis, but you are reducing the funds. How this thing will happen? It's completely contradictory. And poverty level, you know, the poverty level, yes, in 1947, 70% people was under the poverty line. In 2011, it was 22%, and in 2020, it is 27% has increased. So under this poverty level, if you introduce this type of education, it will make anti-constitutional, definitely. And now it is, I think, it is anti-constitutional, anti-student. It will make synchronization. It will help corporate bodies and private bodies to establish school educations and all the things, and bureaucratization, everything. And to conclude, I would like to mention these few points here. NEP is is such a document which is comparable with a sugar coated pill, bitter pill, probably proposed by the technocrats at the behest of the corporate sectors, drafted by the experts like Dr. Manjul Bhargava, chaired by Dr. Kosturi Rangan, and modified by the bureaucrats to please the central government to fulfill the ruling party's long cherished dream to synchronize Indian education system from the grassroots level. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Chakraborty, for your illuminating speech, and you have dealt with different aspects. And you mentioned that Vidyasagar's name was not mentioned even, and the education policy was announced on the death anniversary of Vidyasagar. This attitude of the government, from this attitude of the government, it is amply clear that the philosophy of modern education of Vidyasagar, they don't want and they are against it. And you have already, and you have also dealt with the effect of semester system, the negative effect of semester system on school education, and also different other aspects. Now I request Professor Tapadhir Bhattacharjee. He is former Vice Chancellor of Assam University, Silchar, and he will speak from Silchar. Professor Bhattacharjee.
Thank you for inviting me to this much required and wonderful conference. I have been particularly grateful because I had the opportunity to listen to the learned deliberations of Professor Irfan Habib, Professor Romila Thapa, Professor Shukdev Thorat, and also in particular Professor Karunanandam from Chennai. And after a long time, I had the opportunity to listen to my once colleague, Professor Chandrasekhar Chakraborty, who has completed right now. Well, let me tell you in my way, in this way, that this is our urgently needed task to try to deconstruct the so-called national education policy right from the title itself. Because as it has been properly pointed out by all the speakers, in fact, that is neither national and nor a policy that can educate ourselves. This reminds me of the great educational thinker and philosopher Brazil, Paulo Freire, who wrote a very famous book entitled The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And now instead we find a pedagogy of the oppressor. Friends, according to me, this has been prepared. This is a blueprint of the destruction of India as a nation. And it has been prepared by the Shangha family. And Professor Chakraborty has right now hinted at the help they have received from the technocrats. But definitely the blueprint is the brainchild of the Shangha family. There cannot be any doubt in that. And whatever they have proposed to us, they have dismantled the federal structure of our country, which was so long held very sacred. Well, this is an account, according to me, this is a ideological onslaught on the people of India. In fact, there is no ideology, only simulacra. And it seems that the rulers have set out to subvert the most deeply and solemnly held principles of enlightenment, of civilization, of education. And in fact, with awe-inspiring consistency, the rulers have dared to invert the people's value system and to hang on this inversion with their teeth, the teeth of most abysmal hatred towards all the others. These others constitute of all the Hindus, those who do not believe in the Brahmanical ideals, all women, the Dalits, and what we call in our literary parlance, the subalterns. And as I was telling you that the deconstruction should begin from the title itself. Along with that, I would also suggest that each and every statement in this nefarious and venomous document should be properly read between the lines, because venom is everywhere. Right now, Professor Chakraborty was speaking about the so-called three-language formula. As a student of literature and language, I am particularly concerned regarding the probable outcome of the so-called implementation of the three-language formula. And I will come to that later on, perhaps. But let me tell you, many parts, many segments in this so-called 60 document. For example, the constitution of SIOS, the State Institutes of Open Schooling, through which they propose to teach us in the best possible way the regional languages. My very simple question is, it has already been answered by Professor Chakraborty and others, that they did not really bother to discuss with various state governments. And because they care a damn for the sacred constitution of our country, so they have forgotten that for each and every statement that they have made a so-called policy within court, the state governments and the intelligentsia belonging to different segments of our country should have been taken into confidence, but they did not do it. And the so-called SIOS leads us to pose a counter question. What is its real intention? Because intentionality is the thing that matters most. Friends, I am particularly concerned, and I think all of you are concerned, regarding the true intention of this educational policy. What is our experience since June 2014? There is almost 7.5 years now. They have been able to dismantle the fabric of Indianness among us in all possible ways. They have thrust upon us the policy of hatred, mutual exclusion, and non-belief, which we may bet in a better way, we may put that it is a cult of non-confidence upon who do not agree with us. There may not be so many persons around who may not agree with us at every possible moment. But anyway, I am not here to discuss the philosophy or the lack of it in the document. So let us think that because they have tried to put in the same, under the same umbrella, the pre-primary to the university education. So all the sectors, all the segments of that policy should be properly dealt with, and the people around who are the not the who are the real prey to this so-called policy, venomous policy, the main points, salient points of this non-policy should be taken to them. Friends, if you go into the different paragraphs that they have mentioned, let me first start with the first 28 paragraphs in the fifth column, 5.1 to 5.28. There they have talked about CPD, that means continuous professional development. I would rather try to put it in this way. This is a counter-ideological, C, counter stands for counter-ideology or counter-ideological, and P means pseudo-knowledge, and D means destruction. To the process and system of counter-ideological onslaught and counter epistemological crisis, they are trying to destroy us, and if they do not believe in the equality and justice, then why they have, in a very sugar-coated language, in the introduction itself, in several paragraphs, they have time and again talked about justice and all that, because they do not believe in justice. And now let me, because I cannot speak about everything, they have used the name of Kasturba, wife of Mahatma Gandhi, in constituting, according to their proposition, a particular school for the women. But what they are doing, they are trying to destroy all the coveted symbols. What they have with the spectacle of Mahatma, they have tried to abuse him by putting that symbol of Mahatma, that spectacle, particular spectacle worn by Mahatmaji on the dustbins, on the lavatories, and everywhere. So in the same way, they have tried to misuse the name of Kasturba Gandhi as well. And moreover, what they have been doing in Uttar Pradesh for the last several months, or maybe many a month, many a years now, on the basis of that, can we have any confidence on what they are proposing to do? And as Professor Chakraborty, who spoke before me, he talked about the language teaching in a nutshell, though, they have made use of certain languages, but there are some other languages which have not been enlisted. If they are trying to do it for educating our next generation in different international languages, so some very important languages have been totally cast aside. Well, this is a question. There are many questions which have been put forward to us. Now, another point, it was not mentioned though. I'm trying to refer it to here because I happen to be a student of Sanskrit as well, not only Bengali. They have referred to the very nefarious idea of 64 colors, which are it is known to everybody that it is associated with the Hetaira, that means the Varanganas. Why this has been expressively mentioned that this will be taught, what they want to do with our women, with these 64 colors. And as we cannot expect that they would have any objective approach to our ancient knowledge system. Already Professor Irfan Habib have told about it, so I'm not going into details. They have mentioned Kadambari. I don't know why Kadambari was mentioned, because Kadambari may be cursorily written by Banabhatta. He might have mentioned this the 64 colors, but actually this reminds us of Vatshayana and others before Vatshayana also. But I'm not going into any academic discussion regarding that. I'm concerned about their intention. Sometime back I was thinking of their intention within code. So that intention is nefarious, and this nefarious intention found that because they believe in division, they want to divide our Indian society. So even in the name the classical language also, they have resorted to these exclusionary tactics. Some, I'm not mentioning any language, some languages have been mentioned, while some equally deserving languages have not mentioned. It seems that they are particularly keen to exclude certain languages in order to bring about more division in our society. But my point is, all these considerations are not the business of technocrats, as was mentioned by Chandrasekhar Chakraborty ji, and nor by any popular ministers and others. It is the business of the experts who know what is what, but they have never been mentioned. It has been imposed, because as I was mentioning at the outset, this particular education policy is meant to dismantle our society, not to educate our younger folks. Now, another point, the various intention is clear, because they have proposed that right from the pre-primary to the college level, they will be introducing the system of using the counselors. And who are these counselors? They have not pointed out, but counselors, we are afraid, will be eligible if they have allegiance to the Shanghis and none else. So they want to brainwash our next generation, so that years to come, decades to come, there is no question, no interrogation regarding their intention anywhere. And some time back, some illustrious speaker was making a mention of Nalanda and Takshashila, being a student of Sanskrit, and there are many students of history here as well. They know mere mentioning the name of Nalandas and Takshashilas do not mean anything, because what was their education system in the age they flourished means everything, because now we are at the fag end of 2021. So in this situation, as Professor Chakraborty was mentioning, that they are trying to dismantle the different schools which are regarded very scientific by generation from our all earlier generations. Scientific understanding and the understanding of our arts and liberal arts, I mean, and also the education regarding commerce and everything. But they are into making a mix-up What for?
Professor Bhattacharjee.
Because they try to confuse. Because they know if we can
Professor
make
Bhattacharjee.
confusion,
Professor Bhattacharjee, due
then
to
our
constraint of time,
aim
can I request
to
you?
impose our will on the people will never be challenged.
Professor
Many other
Bhattacharjee.
things, and I will only take much time, but that is not needed perhaps. And another thing, uh, on passe, I want to uh, make a mention of the so-called claim regarding Rashtrabhasha or national language, because it has been, because Hindi is being imposed everywhere on all the language systems of this country. But there is a verdict of Gujarat High Court in 2010, which very clearly states that that Hindi is not, maybe official language, but it is not the national language of our country. There is a hell of a difference between official language and a thing. Another thing, as Chakravarti was mentioning regarding the three language formula, but as we know, right from Rabindranath Tagore and others, he said the mother's milk may be equated to mother tongue, but that mother tongue has been completely disregarded by this so-called document. Instead, they are making use of the local language and home language. What does this peculiar term mean? What is home language? What does it mean? In fact, and you will find it in 4.9, paragraph number 4.9. Here is the home language. This is absurd. And not only absurd, let us be on our guard, because through the position of this so-called new category of home language and disregarding the mother tongue, they are doing greatest possible disservice to the national unity, cultural unity of our country. So we must be on our guard on whatever they have said. So right from the women to the Dalits, and also to this persons I was mentioning, to the those who do not adhere to the Brahmanical thinking system, they have tried to make the federal structure. Federal structure is not something that may or may not be accepted. It is in our belief system, because somebody was making a mention of cultural pluralism, and that cultural pluralism uh, leads to the belief in federal structure of this country, but everything has been dismantled by them. So there are many questions, friends. One by one, I can refer to many, but they needed perhaps. And if mother tongue, as per 4.13, if this is disregarded, then I think we we will be nowhere yet. The rationalism has been dismantled. So, but that does not mean that we have to lose heart. Rather, let us believe that problem of losing freedom looms large over us. And this is not only the thinking of losing of freedom, but rather this is losing our human character. Our cardinal problem of our mankind is an inescapable concern for everybody, because we cannot submit to dehumanization, to counter ideological onslaught. Rather, we should begin from that point where it seems there is no point left. Thanking you once again, sir, and for giving me an opportunity to from my heart whatever I have felt regarding that. Thank you once again, all of you, those who have listened to me.
Thanking you, Professor Bhattacharjee. Quote your one sentence, and that is sufficient to describe the nature of education that you have told. It is the blueprint of destruction of a nation. Thanking you very much. And we are at the end of the session. Now, I will invite Professor L. John Nishan. He is former Vice Chancellor, JSS University, Mysore. And I again mention you that tomorrow there will be a session that will again start from 11, and the link of the session will be circulated after 2 p.m. today. So you circulate to your friends. I invite Professor L. John Nishan, and I also request you to conclude within the time limit. Thank you. Professor John Nishan.
Dear brothers and sisters, and the organizers of this great event, the members and office bearers and leadership of All India Safe Education Committee, and dear participants, and my co-speakers, good afternoon. I think the previous speakers have addressed almost all aspects of the national education policy and its implications in the way in which education is going to head in India in future and spoil this country and the society at large. What I'm going to touch is about the plot and hidden secrets and the hidden agenda of the onset of National Education Policy 2020, and how a policy has to be drafted, and what are the missing issues in the national education policy, and why it is a failure and it's a disaster, and why it should be rejected. So with few points, I would like to just conclude my speech because we don't have much time. You see, the title, the conference is entitled Save Education. It's organized by Save Education Committee. It shows that we have to save education from those who are oppressing and suppressing education. Education has been put in the clutches of those who are at the helm of the affairs. I mean, those who have the political power, those who have social power, and those who have social authority, and those who have the economic power. I mean, the market forces. So this is a triangulated collusion between the political power and the social power and economic power. It's a collusion, it's teamed up together, and education is handled by these collective colluded forces, these triangulated forces, to in their own favor, for the benefit of the few, but against the majority. That is the problem. This country has been facing for several thousand years, several couple of millennium, if you could notice the propagation of education and the way in which education has been handled in the past. You could see that only that education has favored and benefited the few, and disfavored and against the majority of the people. At one point of time in the Indian human evolution, we could notice at least a millennium, at least 2 millennium or 1.5 millennium, we could notice that education has been denied to the majority of the people. So this is the country where we are living in, and education has been denied. We are not talking about the quality of education. We are talking about denial of education that this country has witnessed. And when India got freedom, the literacy rate was about 4.5%, just around 4.5%. And the women were about 0.5%. And men were about 7% to 8%. That's the literacy rate. And you go now and talk and ask questions, just even now today, in the era of information, in the era of scientific revolutions happening and technological revolutions happening these days, you go and ask a question now, even in India, whether this planet is globe or flat. You would probably get an answer that the globe is flat, majority of the people. Certainly. Because we are talking about India, I'm talking about United States. Even in United States, the majority of the people are still thinking that the globe is the flat, where the literacy rate is so high. The information is surging to every household. And this is the education we have been receiving in the past 70 years of independence. Imagine what is the kind of education we have been receiving after independence. Forget the past, because the past was completely a period of nonsense. It's completely a period of nonsense, especially in the 1500 years since now, from now backwards. There was no scientific life in India. There were no discoveries and scientific developments in India. Why? Because we were all suppressed and oppressed and not to receive education, and we were dominated by the religious and social and so-called social and political agenda, and they were oppressing us, and they denied education. And most often that we talk about spirituality, or most of our literature, you just 1500 years old, in South India at least, you could notice that most of the literature and literary works were focusing on what? Spirituality. Spirituality means, I would say that it is unknown science. Spirituality, the way I would like to define is unknown science. It's a metaphysics. You and me can define in our own favor. We can invent gods. We can invent all philosophies and tell the people that this is it. It's a complete nonsense we have been living. Education was suppressed and oppressed and persecuted in the hands of the triangulated collusion of the political power, social power, and economic power. That we must first understand that education did not do anything so far in this country, except some awareness and literacy. I can read and write now. I'm from an agricultural background. I can read and write. Is that what education means then? It's a complete nonsense, I would say. And it was in favor of few and against the majority of the people. That is the problem in this country. What's the root cause then? And now it has culminated with a notorious policy that the world has ever witnessed. A notorious education policy that the world has ever witnessed is National Education Policy 2020. The world also has witnessed such notorious policies under the notorious leaderships. We all have, our forefathers have just recently witnessed last century Mussolini and Hitler. The Nazism of Hitler and the fascism of Mussolini were driven not by weapons. You all must understand first. It was by education. The education started at the age of 6. The Nazist and fascist philosophies were taught to the children at the age of 6 onwards. And the leaders, the so-called leaders, directly involved in defining the subject matters of instruction, the syllabus, the contents. And the soldiers were appointed as teachers. The same thing is happening now. Our teachers are just the soldiers and army of the kind of the cultural revivalism, the traditional Indian, traditional centric education that these people are talking about in the National Education Policy alone. And these are all the soldiers. I am also a soldier, Vice Chancellor. I have to be a soldier to listen the people and take the whip of the people at the Delhi, and I have to implement it. I'm a soldier now. As an individual Vice Chancellor, I have no authority and power to just at least voice my concerns about the education philosophy in this country. that is the fate of the vice chancellor in this country, then I don't know, I cannot imagine the fate of the people, the common man in this country. But I would just submit to the honorable members here, the listeners here, please, my dear friends, the National Education Policy 2020 is more notorious than the notorious policies that the world had witnessed under the leadership of Nazis and fascists in Italy and Germany. So I don't want to talk much about what has been spelled out by co-speakers, but I'm just going to highlight a few points about the national education policy and its failure to address the basic concerns of education, the basic objectives of education, what it is. What is the objective of the education that? It's making the society to get maturity from generation to generation. That's it. Very simple. And as individual members, as a part of the society, we are enlightened in that maturity process. And that maturity, is the manifestation of several human activities and the discoveries and inventions. So the manifestation of the maturity lies in the ability of the society, to discern its inventions, to identify the truth and propagate the truth, and enable elsewhere all society members to be enlightened and resolve the challenges and problems that they face in contemporary times. That must be the idea of education. Have we done that? So that is the maturity. The manifestation of maturity lies in the ability of the society to overcome its problems, the challenges that contemporarily it faces through its human endeavors. And that endeavor is nothing but identifying the truth and implementing the truth and follow those truths on day-to-day basis. The truth is nothing but the knowledge. And it emanates from the human experience. It doesn't come from the sky or doesn't come from gods. We must first understand these terms. If you believe God, you just believe it. So what? Your God is not going to come and tell you that this is the knowledge and this is the science. Nowhere in the history, no evident in the history that we have witnessed that the God has come down from heaven and told us this is what A plus B whole square is about, and this is what the theory of relativity is about, or theory of gravity is about. Will you please dissociate? Don't bring your religious sentiments and your religious cultural, venturism into education. That is the wrongness. And we have the so-called enlightened society, a segment of the society which has the social authority and social power. That has the power even to tell the political power and the economic power that this is what education is about. That is what happening now in the name of national education policy that we must understand. We don't understand. We don't want to understand. That is the problem. That these people take advantage and they try to impose whatever they think funny ideas in the name of education and inculcate on us. That we must oppose. If we are a human being, we must, think about it and react to it. If you are going to be animals simply or inert materials, we just live the way as we have been living for 3,000 years and 2,000 years under this nonsense social structure, a hierarchically degraded, social structure that we have, and that they need education to majority of the people. You please don't forget it. Do you have the national education policy having any answer in its 66 pages document to this kind of a society that we have in this India? Do we have? And one thing that education shows its maturity, that I told you the maturity, the manifestation of the maturity also lies in the ability of the society to close, to bridge the gap between the known science and the unknown mysteries and myths. That is what the maturity of the society is about. And that is where education has to play a catalytic and crucial role. But education couldn't play that role because it is under the hands and the clutches of those people who wants to oppress and suppress majority of the people of this country. This is what happened. The society's maturity lies in its ability to to bridge between the known science and unknown mysteries and myths. That's why I told you that even today people do not know whether the Earth is globe or flat. A survey was done in United States. I'm quoting United States. I'm not quoting India or Ghana or Rwanda or other underdeveloped countries, the nonsense countries. The so-called aware countries do not know whether the Earth is flat or globe. That is what education has failed even in United States and globally, world at large, not only in India. But the manifestations are different in different parts of the world. That we must agree. You and me must agree now. I'm not imposing any of my viewpoints to you. You please think and take a decision. So education's role is a catalytic and crucial role in enabling the society to identify, in its ability to identify the unknowns and convert those unknown mysteries and myths into science, scientific knowns. So there is no mystery and myths then. There will be no foolishness. So eradication of the foolishness in our day-to-day affairs, in our understanding, that comes from the truth. And the truth will only be known when education is allowed to freely, to democratically play its role in converting the known science, in unknown mysteries and myths into known science. That is what I said, that closing the bridge, the bridging between the known science and unknown mysteries. You see, just to quote an example, I don't have much time. Just to quote an example, you go to the Newtonian, period. How was the world living, and the society was leading its life? The life of the humankind is built upon the contemporary, inventions or discoveries of known science. When Newton invented gravitational forces, discovered gravitational forces, not invented, discovered. And later on, electromagnetic forces were discovered. It was a classical physics. So eventually, the part and parcel of our life and endeavors, the human endeavors, were built upon this classical physics. The classical physics, those days, were nothing about concentrating on two forces, gravitational force and electromagnetic force. Through that, we came out with radios and telecommunications and automotives and automobiles and a lot of developments. The human activities have been getting changed. Education played a role, at least partially. So we did. But majority of the people had the opportunity to acquire this knowledge or be benefited by this knowledge or not. Not is the answer. So education has failed. You had Newtonian theories, gravitational forces, electromagnetic forces, the classical physics benefited few, maybe few automobile owners and corporate bodies and the traders and business communities. And especially it's benefited those who are ruling the society. I mean, those who have the authority, the social authority and social status in the social hierarchical system in India. They are benefited. But these Newtonian or gravitational electromagnetic forces, the classical forces, invented 100, 200, 500 years ago, and these forces were not, used for the benefit of the majority of the people, because the people were blindfolded, because education was not doing its job. Even the church had put somebody, sentenced to death because he said the earth is globe. You now understand how religions play. Religions play a crucial role. It suppresses scientific inventions and discoveries. It doesn't allow education for the benefit of the society. It doesn't allow education to serve for the benefit of the society. That is why a person 500, 600 years ago was sentenced to death just because he said that the earth is a globe. So religion said, the earth is flat, it is not a globe, it is not round. The same happens now. The national education policy talks about Indian-centric education, Indian pride, and Indian ethos. That is the vision of the document, NEP 2020. The vision states Indian ethos. What is that Indian ethos? It would be like the earth is flat, isn't it? It's going to be. They are going to teach us the earth is going to be flat because somebody said so 2,000 years ago. Somebody said so, the earth was flat 2,000 years ago. Because of that, we will be forced to learn that. That is what the education is going to be. Dating back 2,000, 2,500 years ago is what NEP 2020 is planning to do. Are we ready to accept that? Okay, in the old classical physical systems, we were not able to get what we are supposed to have got. We didn't get that, right? Because majority of the people do not know even the earth is flat or globe. And majority of us were not able to achieve the benefit of the technologies and scientific inventions and discoveries because education has failed us. The educative capacity of the society is absolutely zero in this country, especially in India. Because when society is able to overcome its problems and challenges and through the scientific means and scientific inventions and discoveries, what is going to happen? We all will be benefited. But it didn't happen. So that means the society is undemocratic, socially divided as watertight compartments, and virtually there is no communications and exchange of ideas and knowledge and the truths. And only a democratic society will help education to achieve its business, its objectives. An undivided is a divided, a segregated, watertight compartment caste system would not allow the people to exchange ideas and reveal the truth. It would not. What is the answer for this question? For my question in NEP 2020, you ask Kasturi Rangan to tell me. I want Kasturi Rangan to tell me or tell this part of the world. Do you have any answer to this question that I raised? I repeatedly raised for 2 years. Now I'm raising again. The enlightened policy makers of this country should tell us. No question. So democracy, undemocratic society will not help. But now, again, okay, gone is gone. Let us not dwell into the past endeavors and which are nonsense. Forget it. No problem. We have a new education policy, 2020. And in this new education policy, do we have answer at least for the 21st century human endeavors and human activities? The human endeavors and human activities are going to be largely controlled by a quantum field. It's modern physics. It's not classical physics. It's not going to be simply based on gravitational laws, gravitational force, or for that matter, electromagnetic force. There are two more forces joined, the subatomic particles have forces, weak forces and strong forces. It's a nuclear force. And these weak forces and strong forces are there in the quantum field. You, me, the invisible electrons and atoms all are in the same field. That field is called quantum field. And this quantum field with superpositions of quanta and so much of subatomic particles playing their roles, and the human activities and our consciousness are going to be changed. Already it is getting changed. Google sitting there in the United States and controlling 7 billion people of the world. Their consciousness, their thought process are influenced by the Google now. That thought process are influenced by Google now. You and me are influenced without we know that our consciousness is influenced by them. That is what happened. So that means that what is there? Does National Education Policy 2020 helps us to face these challenges? If somebody is going to sit and modify our consciousness, influence our consciousness, and influence the way we have to think, It's going to be influenced by the quantum field, quantum computing, quantum channel, and quantum teleportation. It is not far ahead, just only 20 years ahead. We all are, I think I will live another 20 years. Until I see this NEP is rejected and thrown out of India, I will live, right? I will live. So that means another 20 years, I am going to be very, very active. I'm going to see how this quantum field is going to influence us. So do we have this, since it is going to alter our consciousness, our thought process, and since the thought process is the process of that is to be related to pedagogy and learning in education, and what education should do in this transformation, in this technological scientific transformation that is happening now and that is going to be aggressive in the immediate future. What is the answer? Do we have the answer? And another one point that I must submit to you, the production and means of production. It's basically the human activity. Production and means of production. Surpluses, value, labor value, all have been defined. Many of our forefathers, until Karl Marx, Adam Smith, Ricardo, Karl Marx, everybody defined what is the labor and the labor value and how the human activities are comprised of so many factors where the economy is involved, and how to share the benefit of the economy by the majority of the people, by the workers, by the capitalists, by the investors, and so on, have been defined. But I would say that in these contemporary times, in recent times, with the advent of these quantum mechanics and applications in all fields, in our day-to-day affair, we have to redefine what is labor value and the salary and the other benefits involved. Will we get? Have we defined? Can education help me to define that? Do we have an education having a role in defining and redefining the human activities, that is the production and means of production, to ensure that every one of these 7 billion people living in this world have their share, have the opportunity to endeavor into this system and get what they want? That is what education should do. That is what a national education policy should answer. Most of these questions I asked here now were not answered by the National Education Policy 2020. Please. This is taking us 200, 2000, 2500 years back, but Indian-centric, Indian tradition, Indian cultural revivalism. It is not taking us towards the 21st century. It is not taking us even to the next 20 years. That's my viewpoint. So that means that we will be largely a barbaric society, not an enlightened society. I'm having a coat and pant, and yes, I am a barbarian. I'm going to be a barbarian in the NEP 2020. I'm quite sure. I'm not going to be an enlightened, educated person. For that matter, I'm the Vice Chancellor. I have a PhD. I'm going to be a barbarian in the next 20 years. I'm thinking about my fellow citizens who do not have the PhD and who do not have the opportunity to get the enlightenment that I got so far. I'm worried about my fellow citizens, brothers and sisters. Please, this is the moment. Don't take it lightly. And this is the moment we all should show the solidarity. The solidarity is very, very important. And we must raise above all the oppressions and suppressions with all superpowers and political powers we are getting suppressed now. We must raise above and tell this world and educate our companions and our fellow citizens that, yes, it is against the humanity and it is destructive in nature and it must be rejected. For that reason, we all must join hands to reject National Education Policy 2020, and organizations like ISEC, the All India Safe Education Committee, and many more organizations bearing their boundaries and jurisdictions of activities, they all must join hands regardless of caste, creed, all those things, to remove this devastation and create, not just only reject, but create our own education policy that is good for and benefit of the majority of the people. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you. Thank you.
Professor, your nation, he has been with AISCC for long. Let me give an introduction. He has been with AISCC for long. He was a vice chancellor of JS University. He opposed the policy. He himself wrote to the state government demanding not to implement, and the party in power obviously couldn't like it, and he resigned from his post, and he is with the movement. This is Professor Real Nation. So we are in the movement. We have to oppose the national education policy, and we have to launch serious movement in the states and nationwide. So this is all for today, and tomorrow in the first half, that means first 1.5 hour, there are 6 invited speakers, very front-ending intellectuals. They will speak, and in the second 1.5 hour, there will be a delegate session. The main resolution, General Secretary's report will be placed. Some delegates will be allowed to speak, and a new committee will be formed, and a new program of action will be prepared from that session. So I request you all to join tomorrow's session, and link will be circulated shortly. Thanking you very much, all of you in these 3 auditoriums, and those who are tuned with this AISCC YouTube channel and the Facebook page. Thanking you all again. হলো সাকসেসফুলি হলো, কোথাও প্রবলেম হলো না।